April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Caen, France. Oberleutnant Ralph Hermikin couldn't hide his smirk behind the oxygen mask. From the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, he watched the ungainly silhouettes climbing laboriously toward his formation. The 26-year-old German ace couldn't suppress his laughter as he transmitted to his wingman. "The Americans have sent us flying milk bottles." Below them, 16 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts from the 4th Fighter Group struggled against their own 7-ton weight. To German pilots accustomed to sleek Spitfires, these corpulent American machines looked almost comical. Barrel-shaped fuselages, enormous canopies, massive propellers. But Hermikin didn't know. None of the German pilots circling like wolves could have imagined. They were witnessing the arrival of the weapon that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles would transform from objects of mockery into instruments of terror. The sound of their 8 Browning 50 caliber machine guns would become the most feared sound in German skies. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those broad wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute. Enough concentrated firepower to saw a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. That April morning, Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation positioning for attack. The former Eagle Squadron veteran who had transferred from RAF Spitfires just weeks earlier understood what his men didn't yet know. Survival in the P-47 required abandoning everything they thought they knew about air combat. Among the 56 American pilots spread across the French sky that morning were men who would become legends. Future aces whose names would strike fear into Luftwaffe hearts. But on April 8, 1943, they were novices in an untested machine, facing the most experienced fighter force in the world. The Germans had been fighting continuously since 1939. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 0 days. This is the story of how industrial logic defeated tactical brilliance, how German pilots' laughter turned to terror as they discovered what synchronized Browning machine guns could do to an aircraft at 400 yards. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt emerged from a June 1940 panic. As German fighters swept across France, Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the US Army Air Force. They wanted a high-altitude interceptor, capable of matching the Luftwaffe's best. What Kartveli designed instead was a monster that redefined the possible. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted to his design team, "but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor. The massive turbo-supercharger system gave it an almost pregnant appearance. Test pilots approaching it for the first time invariably asked the same question: "This thing actually flies?" Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at altitude. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower, could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, where German fighters gasped for air. But the early months were brutal. Major Hubert Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, initially despised the aircraft. His unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in the first months of combat. Those who mastered it, however, discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would become one of America's top aces with 27 victories, described his first flight. "It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it." The first combat encounters in April and May 1943 confirmed every German prejudice. The P-47s couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190s, couldn't climb with the Messerschmitts, couldn't match their nimble handling at medium altitudes. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter, "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indianer, fat targets pretending to be warriors." The statistics seem to confirm German confidence. In their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. But something strange was happening in those early encounters that German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed incredible punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a May 4th mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. More significantly, when P-47s did get their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. The event that would begin changing German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over Laon, France. It involved 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson and an encounter that would become legendary on both sides of the conflict. Johnson's formation was returning from escort duty when they were bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s. The Germans executed a perfect attack, diving from the sun with overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers. 20 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit. The engine cowling was torn away. Fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel, tried to bail out but discovered the canopy was jammed. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a barely functioning engine that shook violently, and controls that responded only intermittently, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and point it toward England. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then it got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190 discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. What followed was one of the most extraordinary encounters in aerial warfare history. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with his 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. Philip's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? In January 1944, a new variant began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with paddle blades, 13 feet in diameter with broad chord blades that bit into the air like massive oars. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, the paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced to formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar created by the blade tips reaching supersonic speeds could be heard from miles away. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a deep threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. German pilots developed a grudging respect that bordered on fear for the big American fighters. Major Günther Röll, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, survived an encounter with P-47s on March 6, 1944 that left him badly wounded. He later recalled, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters, just gone, transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over long-range escort duties in spring 1944, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally effective against ground targets. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry two 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, engines roaring, rockets screaming. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans." Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our grouper. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,147 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Perhaps the ultimate vindication of the P-47's evolution came in its encounters with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me-262, with its 540 mile-per-hour top speed, should have been untouchable by propeller-driven fighters. But Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch jets in 2 situations: during takeoff and landing, when jets were most vulnerable, and in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down a Me-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. Meyer's combat report noted, "The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The concentrated fire of 850 caliber guns proved more effective than we anticipated against jet aircraft." The ultimate demonstration of American industrial might came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. Hair-captured German pilot brought to the command post pointed at the burning aircraft and taunted, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brookings' response became legendary throughout the 9th Air Force. He pointed to the flight line where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside. "By tomorrow we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared. Within 48 hours, Factory-fresh P-47D-40s filled the flight line. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in Bodenplatte, including many irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders. These losses they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total, across all attacked airfields, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt every hour around the clock. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 M